I may have opened a Pandora's box, and it was in the empty apartment above my friend's garage. A few months ago, I was celebrating his birthday and I had a few too many, so he suggested I crash there. The house he rented had an available unit above the landlord's garage, and the most recent tenant apparently had left without paying rent. Whoever lived there left a lot behind. Most notably, the boxes, and not the moving kind. This was someone's archive. I can't say for sure, but the files appeared to be the work of some sort of private investigator, if you could call them that. Any reference to government agencies or law enforcement were as third parties, while the investigator seemed to be independent. Some of the contents were disturbing in ways I'd never even imagined possible, but even though the events were unsettling, even bizarrely violent at times, many of these occurrences weren't exactly crimes. Whoever lived there was building or collecting case files for what seemed like dozens, maybe even hundreds of separate investigations involving various unexplained and strange events, with some spanning as far back as the late 18th century. I'm no expert, but it didn't seem like these were the scribblings of an unstable conspiracy theorist. These files were organized and well documented. The various notes read mostly objective, with only a few tentative conclusions found in certain files. Some of the supposed evidence are rumor and hearsay, but some, maybe even most of it, refers to actual documentation, sometimes with what looks like original historical evidence stored in manila envelopes. Why would someone leave all this behind? How did they acquire it? And why? I'm not sure what to make of this. Is it all an elaborate hoax just for some person to hoard it away in their apartment? Regardless, I think it's worth sharing because the stuff in these files is really unsettling. So that's what this channel is. Each video, I'll choose a file at random and I will present them to you, being as impartial and open-minded as I can. So sit back, settle in, and take a look for yourself as I tell you about a case file I like to call The Madness in the Mines. The events in the file take place between 1851 and 1852, deep within California's untamed Sierra Nevada mountains, right in the midst of the California gold rush. Our best insight into the unexplained events come from 4 letters written by a young man named Clarence T. Everly. Like countless others of this time, Clarence T. Everly set out west with high hopes and ambitious dreams. What he found instead was a disturbing place beyond the reach of mainstream society, where obsession for gold seemed to be replaced by obsession for something else entirely. Based on the investigator's notes in this case file, whatever it was, whatever these miners found out there, may have been responsible for the apparent mass disappearance soon to follow. Dear Elizabeth, just yesterday, I have concluded my 95-mile passage to Gaston from my unsuccessful ventures in Sacramento City. There is little to tell about my shortcomings in Sacramento gold digging, with my arrival seemingly too late for any significance and the overcrowding a major source of my leaving, to venture instead towards Gaston, a town in which I leave my last hopes of honoring our family. Stories like these were far too common, After traveling across the continent to reach Sacramento, Clarence T. Everly had discovered they were already far too late, so they had no choice but to set their sights on somewhere new. Unlike the well-established Sacramento City, which rested in California's expansive and idyllic Central Valley, Gaston was located deep within the Sierra Nevada mountains. In these days, decisions like these were not to be taken lightly. Where you went and how you got there was often the difference between life and death. A harsh reality that Everly would soon know all too well. After my arrival here yesterday morn, and concluding what seemed to be a 3-person hanging for larceny and murder, I met with a group of fellow panners planning a small settlement 6 miles out. As of this writing, I am still pondering this offer, as the country is no short of dangerous men and vile opportunities. This is the first fateful mention of the place where the disturbing events described in this file would take place, and the last place any record of Everly would be found again. Dearest Elizabeth and Julian, I have made company with a half-dozen group of men from Gaston, of which I mentioned previously, and have joined a settlement of their making. It hasn't been without its troubles, namely its rather disorganized styles, with the blame all-inclusively the booze, the gambling, or the juvenility of youth. I was made aware additionally that 2 men from the company, twin brothers, queerly have recently made claim to a rudimentary mine a few miles east, from a Chinaman forced off his land by government impositions. A few hired Indians and Mexican farmhands accompanied them, and for a while they never failed to come back to the settlement at day's end to gamble and smoke. Their absences, as of late, is curious, I will admit, with hearsay about some sort of allegedly queer object found in the mines. But ultimately, I find no joy in gossip and superstitious accusations. Now, Everly describes a brutal world of hard labor, where the men are eager to blow off steam each night gambling, drinking, and smoking with their fellow companions. But some of the men who used to regularly participate in the fun haven't been returning to camp from their mine. When you consider that it's not just the 2 brothers who are working in this mine, but also the unnamed number of Native American and Mexican farmhands as well, it begs the question, is Everly implying that all of these men are spending their nights still mining? And more strange still, what does any of this have to do with the rumors about an allegedly queer object found down in the mines? Unfortunately, the remainder of this letter appears with a note that reads, "Fragment missing." When we examine the additional documents in the case file, we find more strange layers in the story of Gaston. The file includes ledgers and personal journals of a local merchant which reveal a series of unusual patterns with his regular customers, and it all seems to begin and end with lumber. Before November 1851, the only noteworthy aspect of the merchant's logs was something quite commonplace at the time. The prices were frankly insane. Whiskey, $35, pistol, $50, shovel, $11. But these aren't dollars today. This was 1851. It wasn't just the gold miners who aimed to strike it rich. Among other items, the merchant would only occasionally sell lumber. That is, until a group of strange miners from a camp out east would upend his entire business model. I leave the hard work for young Josiah to fetch the lumber, which has been ordered mostly by a few individuals from a nearby miners' camp to the east. As a principal, I take no interest of others, but as of late I have found their well-being on my mind, and today, it is towards these men that I have grown gravely concerned. According to the ledger, the purchase of lumber seems to spike around November of 1851, then increasing in frequency until February before finally stopping suddenly. Why were these men buying such obscene amounts of lumber? And why, whenever they stopped for lumber, did they seem to buy only eggs? Apparently, eggs in the Old West were prohibitively expensive. Even by today's standards, paying about $10 per egg is astronomical. And here's the kicker. All this lumber and all these eggs, they weren't even paying for it. Despite being reliable in the past, over the last few visits, the miners had begun a pattern, making their purchases on honor of credit, promising to pay the merchant back later. His journal goes on to describe the miner's state in the last month he saw them. They appeared gaunt, perhaps jaundiced, with a brooding, crazy stare that startled me. Mentally, they seemed somewhat absent, but worked strikingly in unison with no words expressed amongst them. What is the most indescribable is the unsettled and soul-stirring fog they seem to carry with them. It is not a fog that is seen, yet is surely felt all the same. Working strikingly in unison with no words expressed amongst them. A fog that is not seen, yet is surely felt. What does he mean by all this? Are these the twin brothers and their workers? Unfortunately, we don't find out. The merchant never elaborated further. We still have a large supply of lumber that we promised to deliver by the end of the week. Typically, I would let Josiah take the wagon, but I cannot in good conscience have the young man face such disturbed demeanors. I will take that burden in hopes that this gesture might inspire them to honor their credit. Otherwise, I fear this may mark a setback which I will suffer for many months to come. As far as his logbook shows, the miner's vast debt to the merchant would never be repaid. Things are not well here, and I suspect dreadful things of the others I formerly shared company restful with. They act as kindred when once in quarrel, all without sleep, without noticeable provisions of any kind. It is I alone who persists in the original settlement now, the others leaving behind what is undoubtedly the bulk of their wares, leaving foods to spoil to give off the most foul of smells around the entire camp. Not an odor they are unfamiliar with, no doubt. They look sickly, the entire lot of them, but in a way I have never seen with any flu nor infectious ailment. The patterns of behavior described by Everly seem to be consistent with what the merchant observed in Gaston. Both describe them as strangely unwell and working obsessively, but the similarities don't stop there. Always working now, pertinaciously bringing more of the ungodly lumber in the mountain's mouth. I hesitate to admit for fear that you may condemn my testimony to some unnatural hallucination, that on more than one occasion do I believe to have seen these men carry entire trees, whole and untrimmed, leaves rattling from their limbs, down into its depths. At this rate, I hardly would disbelieve the entire forest clearing by month's end. Entire trees. Just like the merchant, Everly describes them as working in unison, suggesting some common goal. What that goal is, however, remains unclear. What we do know is that large amounts of lumber were required. The mining techniques of that era involved using wood to create square-set timbering or timber cribs, which required generous amounts of wood. But to hear Everly anticipate the entire forest's clearing by month's end, as well as his disturbing description of the men carrying down entire trees, whole and untrimmed, we seem to be talking about an excessive volume of lumber. So, at this point we have two independent sources. Both verify that these men were A, working obsessively towards an unknown common goal in eerie unison, B, appeared to be malnourished and sick, and C, were hauling enormous amounts of lumber, including entire trees, down into the mines. I will be taking my leave post-haste once I gather my belongings, of which it will take me no more than a few days' labor to do so. I have no desire to dally, hardly able to even sleep anymore with them working all night in that godforsaken shaft. Things coming in, never coming out. It's unholy. What were they doing? And why did no one except these miners seem to have any clue what was driving them to do it? What did the twins find in that mine? What was the mentioned object? Everly was exhausted. He was financially ruined, and now, surrounded by men whose bizarre behavior he couldn't understand, he finally admitted defeat. The sentences which end this third letter may turn out to be Everly's last few coherent thoughts on record. I do not recognize this as defeat, Elizabeth. Even when it is evidently so, I will move east and I will continue our correspondences without delay. I am fearful, admittedly so, but not without my stubbornness too. Things will get better, Elizabeth. I will come home with the means we deserve. Clarence T. Everly. He would not fulfill this promise. Two months later, a second entry in the merchant's journal describes his return to the miners' camp, hoping to get back the money he was owed. Now, everything up until this point, while at times strange, has more or less made some sort of sense. This, though, I don't know, I'm not so sure. So, here it is, the merchant's second journal entry. The bastards finally got the better of me. All goodwill gone. I cannot contain my anger. What was I thinking? Full camp of them gone. Must have caught wind of my embarking their way east to collect on their debts. Not been left. I found their putrid and soiled belongings, empty tents, shit where they slept, piled feces and worse strewn about, whole camp smelled of rot. They spared no tree, gladly take my lumber and near uproot the whole damned forest. Hell, the splintered stumps showed dried blood on them. Did my tools fail so easily that they resorted to their own clawing fingers? There's no shade left. Sun baked a rank smell of it all. Would rather soon forget if I could, the savages. Feel uneasy about it. Something wretched about that mine. Whole pile of shoes near the mouth. Almost took the lot of them to repurpose and sell. Need to make up for lost monies. Thought better of it. Started to walk in, but heard some sort of noise I wish I didn't. Didn't sound like bear nor man. Felt a gaze on me. Something lurking in the depths. Needed to get the hell out of there. For all I care, they can be rotting in the bowels of that accursed mine. Thinking about their sorry state, it would not surprise me one lick. I mean, we gotta start with the feces. I have no doubt things at this time were very different than we're used to today, but yeah, when he says strewn about, does he mean everywhere? Then there's the whole camp smell of rot, which almost implies something else. And what about when he says feces and worse? Maybe it's best not to wonder about that. Then there's the matter of the trees. Everly had described seeing the men carry enormous amounts of lumber, even whole trees, into the mines. Now the merchant shows up to find barely a tree in sight, the men having used every method at their disposal. And the pile of shoes. something about that is all wrong. Anyone who has spent time in the wilderness knows that your footwear can be a lifeline, and for miners in the untamed California wilderness, one can only imagine the value of reliable shoes. And what about when he stepped down into the mine? The sound he heard. But the real headline here is this: where did they go? At the beginning of the letter, he assumes they fled the camp because he was coming to collect, but by the end, he speculates about a different explanation. Maybe the merchant was just coping, or maybe when he took in the horrendous scene, a part of him almost knew these men weren't going to just leave this place because they owed someone money. This place had fallen so far from anything resembling normal civilized society that the only explanation for where they were had to be down in the mine. I can't help but wonder if all of this has something to do with that object Everly mentioned back in letter 2. In all the materials, it's only mentioned once, but then, tucked near the back of the file, there's this. There's no notes in the file referring to the drawing or explaining it, only a single word scribbled on an index card, clipped to the back that reads, Relic. At first glance, it almost seems like a depiction of a tree with a large, intertwined root system. If it is a tree, it appears to be embedded within rocks, perhaps within the cave itself, with roots extending not just down, but in all directions. Then, of course, there's the object in the center. It's circular with almost perfect geometry, containing what seem to be mechanical modules. Is this what the miners found down there? By relic, is the investigator referring to the circular object in the center, or does relic somehow refer to the entirety of the image, roots and all? And why did the investigator provide no further notes? I cannot fathom the profound disquiet of unearthing such an anomaly deep in the mines. If they did find it in the mine, a mine they themselves dug out and wasn't there before, that would suggest that this tree, or relic, or whatever it is, has been resting within these mountains for a very, very long time. This fourth letter from Clarence T. Everly would be his last. It seems that despite his previous intention to leave the strange encampment behind him, something unknown stopped him from ever returning home. Not too long after his letter, things certainly changed for Everly. He begins his letter by seemingly misspelling his own wife's name, only to cross it out and land simply on Beth. To call the letter that follows difficult to interpret would be an understatement. It is not too late to translate, but there is no me, and no home, and no warm fire, and no grace to come back to evermore. And it burns my insides, and it hurts, but I understand it. And it permits us to witter and chatter and mag as it lets all things with inquietude natures when it first opens its will, its ancient dark wet. And it's me it sees, and it shows me that we too are seeing the shimmering crystal lights of colors of a million ages, always been there, and there is no place to go to hide from God any longer. Yet the remorseless sun laughs and goes to rest upon witnessing oblivion, and there is no rest for us extended as we become endowed with unguessed kinship for the temple who has always been here and always shall. Yeah, so he seems to reference something described as an ancient dark wet. Whatever it is, he seems to be personifying it. Something that opens its will and sees him and shows him some psychedelic imagery. At least that's how I understood it. No man, no ghost or scribe, no single leaf on a dense forest could put forth claim to precedence, and we will feed as to preserve to the uttermost granulation of reality, so profoundly terrible and horrible as it may be, but we feed it, and we feel good, and it protects us frail blackened pilgrims from the sand that cracks under our very feet. Are Everly and the rest of the miners interacting with this thing, this idea or object or whatever it is, as if it's some sort of deity or something? Feeding it what exactly? Lumber? Or is the lumber for a dark, subterranean temple? Without the colors, without teeth and eyes and viscera, sodomized with screams, without protection in the dark to bury from the sun. Naked monks with no name, insubstantial without the many holes in dark womb. While I can't even begin to decipher what he's saying here, it is horrifying in its imagery. And then there's also this. It in ARCADIA ego. A quick Google search brings up this painting by French Baroque painter Nicolas Poussin, depicting 4 shepherds congregating around a tomb with that inscription. The Latin phrase translates to, even in ARCADIA, there am I. According to the wiki, Poussin's biographer says that the I in the phrase refers to death, effectively making the painting a memento mori, reminding us that even in Utopia of ARCADIA, death still exists. Is this what Clarence intended when he wrote this? Because, as far as I know, Clarence is just a miner. He's not a biographer, a professor, or a painting enthusiast. So maybe he got this phrase somewhere else. Whatever sacred knowledge Clarence seemed to have tapped into, even he knew there is no peace. He ends the letter with this. And we are reminded as we continue our worship, and we understand, and Mother understands, and Father understands, and Alan understands, that wild meat is foul meat, tasted unprotected, and we hear it, and we answer. I'm going to be honest here and say that this final letter made me feel really weird. There is so much going on. It's hard to make sense of it, but even just holding the letter felt so uneasy. So where is this mine? According to an article written around this time period, a landslide may have covered any trace of it back in 1852. Wherever it was, it is now lost to time, only living on as written memories of a few individuals. Whether or not these events live in reality is hard for me to determine, but what's recorded and preserved certainly paint an unnerving portrait that won't seem to leave my mind. The thing is, madness is a very real thing, especially when driven by greed. Miners everywhere were risking their life savings, their family, and their own life, hoping to strike it rich. And most did not. In reality, the people who got the richest were the ones selling them their wares, selling them the dream. Maybe in this is where the madness breeds. To push a dream, to push hope in such an intangible way that only leads to suffering. And for an unlucky few, it leads to something else entirely. This strange object, something more potent than gold, pushing them towards a singular goal. Whatever the truth is, it lies somewhere in that cave. But please let me know what you think. For me, this is only part of a bigger question. Why are these files here, and who left them? This particular folder doesn't contain much in the way of notes or any hints about the archivist. It's just a folder full of evidence. But the other folders, they might offer a bit more. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching. I'll leave you with this.